Every decision Washington makes regarding Israel isn't just another diplomatic maneuver, it's a crossroads that could shape America's future. Imagine standing before a grand tapestry, its threads woven over 4 millennia, and knowing that tugging just one strand can ripple through history. That's the backdrop against which US policymakers operate, a 4,000-year-old warning echoing through the corridors of power, reminding every leader that how America treats Israel may well determine its own destiny. On the surface, analysts point to realpolitik, shared democratic ideals, strategic military partnerships, and the undeniable clout of influential advocacy groups. It's like describing the Empire State Building by noting its gleaming glass facade. You wouldn't know about the iron framework holding it aloft, or the bedrock deep beneath Manhattan driving piles of steel into the earth. Likewise, while strategic interests and lobbying are part of the story, they don't explain the lasting endurance of this alliance. To truly grasp why the United States remains Israel's steadfast ally, through wars, shifting administrations, and mounting global pressure, means venturing into a territory many modern commentators avoid, the realm of theology, ancient covenants, and prophecies they say are unfolding before our very eyes. This isn't about peddling blind faith, it's about recognizing a historical pattern so persistent that leaders and scholars from Woodrow Wilson to Harry Truman noted its significance, sometimes even before official statements were drafted. Consider, for example, America's founding generations. The Puritans landing on Plymouth Rock saw themselves mirrored in Israel's Exodus story, a people fleeing oppression to forge a promised land under God's guiding hand. Thomas Jefferson, an avid student of the Hebrew Bible, even designed his copy of the Old Testament with room for notes, convinced its lessons held timeless truth for shaping a nation based on liberty and responsibility. Their vision laid an unwritten foundation, one that treated Israel not merely as a foreign ally, but as a spiritual sibling whose story was inextricably bound to America's own. Fast forward to the 20th century. When President Truman recognized the new state of Israel in 1948, he reportedly told his advisors, "I don't care about all the politics in this. I believe each nation under God must do what God says." Whether political or divine, that conviction set a precedent. America would not simply weigh interest against interest, but would consider something larger, a covenant narrative many Christians and Jews alike believe underpins world events. Today, you don't have to accept theological premises to notice the pattern. Look at the ebb and flow of empires. Britain, once mistress of a quarter of the globe, began its decline after tightening restrictions on Jewish immigration to Palestine in 1939. Contrast that with the United States, whose ascent to superpower status paralleled its strong support for Israel, from diplomatic backing in the United Nations to billions in security aid. Coincidence? Many observers, including historians like Paul Johnson and theologians such as George Washington's biographer David Barton, argue otherwise. This alliance stands apart because it's forged not in the boardrooms of Washington, but in the ancient sands of the Near East, where promises made to Abraham echo in every debate over Jerusalem's status. When modern policymakers send aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean or veto anti-Israel resolutions at the UN, they are not simply playing chess. They are stepping into a millennia-old drama, where blessing or curse hangs in the balance. So, before you chalk up US-Israel relations to cold strategy or political expediency, consider this. Perhaps there is a steel frame of divine promise underpinning the skyscraper of modern politics. And if that frame holds true, then every choice becomes more than policy. It becomes a stake in a grand narrative that may well shape not only the Middle East, but the destiny of America itself. As we turn to examine the bedrock of this enduring friendship, the Abrahamic covenant and its 3 unshakable promises, ask yourself, what would it mean for a nation to anchor its foreign policy in a promise it believes spans centuries? In the next segment, we'll delve into that ancient pact, exploring how an oath made under a smoking firepot still guides world leaders today. Think back to that ancient moment in the desert, when Abraham stood under a sky glittering with stars, and God orchestrated a ceremony unlike any other in human history. In Genesis 15, we read of a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passing between the divided carcasses of animals, symbolizing a covenant, an unconditional promise that rests entirely on God's faithfulness, not on ours. Unlike the Mosaic law at Sinai, which required Israel's obedience to secure blessings, this Abrahamic covenant hinges solely on the one who made it. It's as if God reached across time and space, solemnly declaring, "I will carry this promise to fulfillment, no matter what unfolds." That profound truth sets the foundation for understanding why the bond between the United States and Israel transcends mere politics. It's anchored in a divine oath, older than any nation on earth. This covenant stands on three unshakable pillars, each one echoing through millennia. First, there is the promise of a people. From Abraham's childless tent emerged a nation that would defy the darkest of odds, surviving Pharaoh's persecutions in Egypt, the brutal exiles to Assyria and Babylon, and the brutal attempt at annihilation in the Holocaust. Despite centuries of dispersion, these descendants formed a continuous thread through history, proving that what God begins, He sustains. Their very survival reads like a historical miracle, a testament that a promise spoken amid animal halves can indeed outlast empires. Second, the covenant grants an everlasting possession of land. Genesis 17:8 proclaims it plainly, "To you and to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates." Even when the people's unfaithfulness led to exile, their title deed remained securely held by the Lord Himself. Deuteronomy 30:3-5 unfolds the next act in this drama, prophesying that God will gather scattered Israel from every corner of the globe and return them to their ancestral home. In 1948, when Israel re-emerged as a sovereign state, it was more than a political milestone, it was the unfolding of a prophecy laid down thousands of years earlier, a divine guarantee that land promises in Scripture are not metaphors, but commitments written in eternity. The third pillar binds all nations to this covenant through blessing and cursing. Genesis 12:3 declares, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This principle operates like a spiritual law woven into the fabric of history, influencing the rise and fall of empires. Look back at the Spanish Empire, which reached its zenith in the 15th century, but began a swift decline after the 1492 expulsion of Jews from Spain. Or consider Britain. The 1939 White Paper, severely restricting Jewish immigration to Palestine, arguably marked the start of its imperial unraveling. Conversely, the United States' ascent to a global superpower parallels its consistent support for Israel, from Truman's recognition in 1948 to successive administrations, diplomatic and military backing. Whether one attributes these patterns to divine oversight or to the pragmatic foresight of policymakers, the symmetry is striking. As we reflect on these three pillars, people, land, and blessing, we see that the US-Israel alliance isn't built on shifting political trends, but on a covenant that predates any modern state. It's a narrative that invites nations to participate in a story far greater than any policy briefing. In our next segment, we'll explore how this covenantal foundation has played out across Israel's turbulent history, from exile to miraculous return, and how those events continue to shape the prophetic clock ticking toward the future. For nearly 2 millennia, the land of Israel lay silent and desolate, an empty stage awaiting its next act. Long before Rome's legions razed Jerusalem in AD 70, Moses had warned in Deuteronomy 28:64 that God would scatter his people among all nations, and Leviticus 26:33 added, "Your land will be desolate, and your cities will be in ruins." Fast forward to 1867, when Mark Twain visited the Holy Land and described it as a desolate country, a mournful expanse. Imagine standing there yourself, sun-bleached stones, wind-swept plains, nothing growing but weeds. For anyone watching history unfold, it looked like a fulfillment of prophecy, and a fitting backdrop for what would come next. Then, in 1948, something extraordinary happened. A nation sprang to life in a single day. Isaiah 66:8 asks, "Can a land be born in one day?" It seemed impossible until that May morning when Israel declared independence and world leaders watched in stunned amazement. To many observers, this wasn't just politics. It was Ezekiel's vision of dry bones coming together, Ezekiel 37, sinews and flesh forming on lifeless bones, only to be filled with breath. A people once scattered and presumed lost suddenly reclaimed their homeland, just as the ancient prophecy promised. In my own research, I've pored over survivors' accounts from the early kibbutzim, stories of young pioneers planting trees in parched soil, not just to grow food, but to testify to a promise centuries old. But the rebirth story didn't end with borders. The very land began to bloom. Isaiah 35:1 foretold, "The desert shall rejoice and blossom." And today, Israel stands as a world leader in agricultural innovation, drip irrigation, greenhouse technology, and water recycling systems that have turned arid fields into bountiful orchards. Walking through a citrus grove in the Negev, you can almost hear the echo of that ancient promise in every bud and blossom. Perhaps most striking is the revival of the Hebrew language. After lying dormant for nearly 2,000 years, used primarily in prayer and scripture, Hebrew leapt back into daily life, thanks to visionaries like Eliezer ben Yehuda. He raised his sons speaking solely in Hebrew, wrote dictionaries, and championed the language in schools. Today, you hear Hebrew in Haifa's cafes, in Tel Aviv's tech hubs, and across child-filled playgrounds. Proof that a tongue thought dead could again carry the laughter of children. It's a linguistic miracle that invites comparison with Zephaniah's promise. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord. Yet, the story remains unfinished until we consider the prophecies that look forward to an even greater climax. Ezekiel 38-39 describes a coalition, nations from the north and south, rising against a secure Israel. When my people dwell securely, God warns, you will advance against them. Today, geopolitical tensions echo that warning as alliances shift and threats simmer around Israel's borders. And then there is Armageddon. Revelation 16:16 speaks of the great valley of Megiddo as the gathering place for the world's armies, not against each other, but against the returning Messiah. It's a sobering picture. The final battle staged in the same land where Abraham once walked and where the dry bones of prophecy first stirred to life. So as we stand on this threshold, between a miraculous past and an unfolding prophetic future, one question looms. With all these signs laid before us, how will we respond? In our concluding segment, we'll weave these threads together and explore what it means for America's choices today, and how each of us can engage with this ancient yet living story. Have you ever wondered why America's founders, those early Puritans crossing the Atlantic in search of religious freedom, saw themselves mirrored in Israel's Exodus story? They believed their own promised land journey was part of a divine tapestry, woven with threads of Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. When John Adams drafted his ideas on governance, and Thomas Jefferson annotated his Hebrew Bible, they weren't merely dabbling in ancient texts. They were embedding a theological conviction into the DNA of a new nation. From Plymouth Rock to Philadelphia's Independence Hall, America's destiny became inseparable from Israel's story of promise and peril. History offers striking examples of that covenant principle in action. The Spanish Empire, once unmatched in global influence, reached its pinnacle in the late 15th century, only to begin a gradual decline after the 1492 Alhambra decree expelled Jews from Spain. Centuries later, Britain's once mighty empire faltered following the 1939 White Paper, which restricted Jewish immigration to Palestine even as the Holocaust raged. Meanwhile, the United States rose to superpower status in the mid-20th century, just as it extended diplomatic recognition to Israel in 1948, and provided steadfast support through wars and UN votes. Whether coincidence or divine design, the pattern is compelling. Nations that honor Israel find their own paths elevated. Those that turn away often falter. In modern America, tens of millions of evangelical Christians serve as watchmen on the wall, seeing support for Israel not as a mere foreign policy option, but as an act of worshipful obedience. Organizations like Christians United for Israel, SUFI, led by Pastor John Hagee, mobilize grassroots and congressional influence under the banner of Genesis 12:3. Weekly prayer breakfasts, citywide rallies, and sustained lobbying efforts remind policymakers of a higher law that transcends party lines. For these believers, blessing Israel is a concrete expression of faith, an investment in the unfolding of God's prophetic clock. As we draw near to our conclusion, consider this. From Abraham's tent ceremony to the halls of Capitol Hill, the US-Israel alliance emerges as more than strategy or sentiment. It stands as a living testament to an ancient covenant, a divine promise etched into the course of history. Every veto of an anti-Israel resolution, every shipment of defense aid, echoes with the weight of "I will bless those who bless you." Could it be that America's blessing of Israel is, in turn, a blessing upon itself? If you found clarity and conviction in this exploration, subscribe now and ring the notification bell. Our next videos will dive deeper into how we can engage this prophetic partnership personally and practically. Don't miss our upcoming discussion on actionable steps you can take to stand with Israel and align your own life with this unfolding divine narrative. Hit subscribe and stay with us.